welcome everyone. I'm here with the author of the Leaders Toolkit, Dave Berkus. So welcome, Dave. And before we get started, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
First of all, hi, Roz. I'm happy to be here. I'm in Los Angeles. I have a long history. First of all, I'm 85. So I started my first business at the age of 15. That means 70 years ago. And that business put me through college. And I took it public years after college. And it was a record manufacturing business. Started out manufacturing records for schools and colleges and ended up with a commercial record manufacturing company with a real plant in Hollywood. I sold that after I had programmed a very, very early mini computer. In fact, serial number 4 of the computer company that had the first video screen. And it was those programs that led me, after 215 customers, to the first hotel industry, or the first hotel. And our hotel system dominated the world's hotel systems for a while. Reservations and front office. I had an office in Australia, one in Singapore, one in Malaysia, one in Thailand. It goes on and on. 29 offices around the world. And so as we talk today about leadership, I sold that company in 1990. And that sounds like a long time ago, but that was after 37 years of running 2 companies, one public, and got into the business of investing in other entrepreneurs. Since that time, I have managed 5 investment funds, including my family trust, and invested in 215 other entrepreneurs. And so maybe if we have some time today, as you ask questions, I'll tell you some stories about some of these entrepreneurs and the lessons that I've learned, and maybe that they've learned too.
That'd be great. So you've got your book, The Leaders Toolkit. In the book, you say that leadership isn't it's not innate, and we know that, but it's a set of skills that can be cultivated. What's the biggest myth that leaders still believe about what makes them effective?
First thing that I find when I invest in an entrepreneur is try and figure out whether the entrepreneur thinks that they know everything. And it also bothers me when they show people that they think they know everything, because an entrepreneur should be a visionary, and an entrepreneur ought to be able to pull the best out of the people that he or she hires. So my best problem is when an entrepreneur doesn't admit that they don't know what they don't know. And that leads me to think that when I make an investment, that entrepreneur needs to be coachable and flexible. And if not, and I can usually tell in the first 2 or 3 minutes of a conversation, if not, that's a no for me, a hard no for me.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that I find one of the biggest, I suppose, skills in leadership is curiosity. That
Good.
isn't it interesting that you've got a different idea to me? I'd love to hear what you're thinking. Let's explore this together, rather than that cut off, I know better than you, therefore that's why I'm the boss.
Good for you, because that empowers the people that you're talking to. Makes them feel good about themselves. It makes them feel like they have more they can contribute to the company. And if you're speaking about culture, and we really haven't started that conversation yet, it is a great way to get great company culture.
So you've led companies, you've been investing in others for decades. What patterns do you see in leaders who succeed versus those who fail?
I think that a good CEO, a good executive, is always learning from people that surround them and learning from whatever they can. I am the leader of a group of 12 CEOs that meets once a month for 4 hours. And we have decided as a group that we're going to spend no less than an hour a week exploring AI. Even if we think we have no need for it. That's saying something that isn't true, but no need for it in our corporations. All of us feel like we need to learn to stay ahead. And so there's one example. When I was running the company, we had 233 employees, most of them here in California with me, and I would wander. Now, that's an old thing that we used to talk about, management by wandering around. I wasn't managing. I was talking to employees 2 and 3 and 4 levels below me, saying, how are you doing? Teach me something. Or let me help you if I can? Or what do you need? All of those questions mean it's really something as a leader to be able to be vulnerable.
I really love that approach. I worked for a CEO years ago now who was very much like that, and people absolutely loved him. They really did. I remember when he announced that he was leaving, and it was almost like this grief settled over the company because
Oh,
he'd been
yeah.
so impactful on people. I remember I had a young lass working for me who was a trainee, and she won the Trainee of the Year award. And she and I went to the awards ceremony on a Saturday night and picked it up, and it was in the paper over the weekend, just in the middle section. It wasn't a big deal. It was just tucked away, about page 15 of the newspaper.
Hmm.
And on Monday morning, he came around to see her at her desk and congratulated her. And she said, I had no idea he even knew who I was. We had over 1,000 people in the company, but he specifically went out of his way to come and see her, and she was thrilled.
So I used to, back in the day when birthday cards were cards instead of just an email message, I would sit in my recliner watching television, and my assistant would hand me the birth dates of each of the employees around the world. And I would write a personal message to each and send an actual, literal, handwritten birthday card to everybody every year. That sounds like nothing, but it really made a difference. And as I go to
Yeah.
trade shows today after all these years, it's kind of fun to hear the echo of people saying, this was the company that was most fun and the best company I've ever worked with. And isn't that what a boss wants to hear?
Absolutely. I really love that. You challenge the idea that leadership is about charisma or vision. So, what actually defines an outstanding leader in practice, in your view?
I love to make other people successful. And if you're not threatened by it, you become a better leader because you have brought other people up to the standard that they become leaders, even if they leave you and go find something else. I'm very proud of the fact that I have long ago been awarded the Leadership Award for the hospitality technology industry, the Hall of Fame. But three others of my former employees have also won that award over the years as they moved on to other companies. Makes me really proud. It's the largest number for of people from one company that have ever won that award. And so it kind of says that if you work at helping make people successful, it's like a boomerang. It comes back to you.
Mm. And it's a wonderful approach that being obsessed with making other people successful, it's not something that you see in leaders that often, to be honest. There are certainly leaders out there who are threatened by that. It's that idea of,
Oh boy.
people can rise to a certain point, but they can't rise any further than that because that threatens me. How do you feel that that really holds leaders back or holds back the company in general?
Let me tell you a story that kind of says that people will follow a leader by example rather than by statement. So leaders can't stand in front of a monthly meeting and gain the respect of its people. You really have to just do it. So I remember way back when, going back now to the record manufacturing company, it was in Hollywood. We had 52 employees at the time, and the one of the pressmen, a kid that was beloved, we all had really good feelings about Bobby. That was his name. And one day on his day off, Bobby came into the shop, into the press area, carrying a package. And I happened to be walking around the same time, and it was stolen goods, and he was trying to sell them to some of the other employees. And I caught him in the act, and I fired him right away. Here was one of the most beloved of the employees. And so I was afraid of feedback from the people who were all around that the boss did something arbitrary. But actually, later in the day, three or four people walked into my office and said, you did the right thing, Dave. And it really gave me, for the very first time, I was young at the time, a lesson. You always are learning that sometimes you do the hard things and you do them at the right time and you make decisions quickly when they have to be made. And people respect that.
And there is a powerful line that culture is what you tolerate when no one's watching. And I really
Yeah.
hear that in that story. I mean, you happen to be watching at the time, but it's really as culture builds up over the things that people walk past and don't do anything about. And they might be
Right.
small things, but they gradually snowball. So what do you see in, I suppose, the modern world of work? What are leaders unintentionally tolerating right now that you think is eroding performance?
Oh, I can give you a list. But the first one is allowing employees who really aren't focused on their job to remain in place because other employees know that right away. It isn't easy. It isn't easy to mask bad behavior, bad judgment. So that's one. And if in the medium ranks they believe that somebody should go, but the senior manager says no, sometimes that's going to be very much against the culture of the company. And other times we have employees that just aren't pulling their weight. And there is that question. I remember the book Top Grading, so do you. And there is that question about whether or not you've let go of the bottom 10% of all of your employees, which some of the bigger companies in Silicon Valley are actually doing and still do. I don't believe in doing it that way, but I do believe in empowering middle managers to be able to determine who is carrying their weight, who is leading within a group, who should be promoted, and who should always get the attaboys, the common ability to say you've done a great job and say it in front of all the other people so they know that you believe what you say.
I really enjoyed your parable about the ant and the ant
Oh,
being the one who
yes.
gets sacked at the end. Because you see
Mm-hmm.
that so often, don't you? So there's kind of these two things. There's the people who aren't pulling their weight, who get tolerated in organisations, and there are the ones who are doing a lot of work who, when they realise that then other people are getting away with not doing much, they, not that they slack off, they just lose enthusiasm and lose engagement. And then push comes to shove, and
Right.
they often are the ones that get let go at the end of it.
For your viewers that don't know what you heard Roz talk about, that is the parable of the lion and the ant. And I think it comes from Aesop's fables. I never could figure out where it came from. But when I first read it, it was so obviously a story of what happens in business so often. A great little employee, this was a young ant doing a great job, was observed by the owner of the business to do so well that the owner of the business built a giant enterprise, which of course was never as efficient as the one ant was, or other ants like that, and it destroyed the business. And so I took the time to analyze that, find the educational opportunity that came out of that, published it first in 2016 as a blog. And I can't believe hundreds of people still come every week to that. I've changed the illustration, but that particular blog that I've republished a couple of times. I'm glad you noticed it. It certainly is something that people smile at because it just kind of hits home.
He does. I particularly enjoyed the things about all the new supervisors like Cicada coming in, and the first thing they do is upgrade their office when they get there
Exactly.
because that adds so much to productivity.
Or hire assistants or buy better desks.
Yeah. So in the book, you explore multiple leadership styles. You talk about things like visionary, servant, decisive, and so on. How should leaders know which style to lean into and when?
That's a great question because there are a lot of styles. Let's just talk about a couple of them. The first one is you're going to be a decisive leader, and you wonder whether or not that's the kind of thing that you're expected to be. The problem is if you're a decisive leader, people kind of shy away. You are making decisions that might be better made by the level below you. You're taking away some of the authority of those people. So a decisive leader needs to be decisive at one time when there's an emergency, an urgency, or a blockage or a need. And so I talk often about bottlenecks and blockages because the real business of a leader is to supply resources, to get rid of those blockages and allow people to do their work. So that's number one. Number two is there is the leader that kind of leads from behind. And that's okay too, because you have empowered people, you've given them the resources, and that's one way of allowing people to shine. And it is a good thing that you do when you can do that. However, there are times when people that lead behind look like they're weak. And so I'd be a little afraid to say that's a leadership style. It's something you use as a tool to empower your people, but not often as your only style. There is the cheerleader. And the cheerleader is the one that is always out there at the monthly meetings saying, here's the employee of the month. Here is something that happened that is great. But the cheerleader becomes a very hollow leader after a while. Think of the companies you've been in, and for the viewers as well, that always have an employee of the month. And after the first 4 or 5 or 6, depending on the size of the company, it becomes difficult for management to figure out who should get it the next time. And now you know you've kind of worn out what turns out to be a model that isn't the best model of all. So I would think that a great leadership style is one where you remove the obstacles, you empower the people under you, and you are the leader, but you're leading by example and stepping back and letting other people learn. Let me add one more thing to that. There are 3 things you can tell them: do it, how to do it, and why to do it. And if you tell them to do it, of course, that's one of the jobs of a leader. If you tell them how to do it, you are usually cutting them off at the knees, because most of these people know how to do it, and it's an insult to try and tell them. But if you don't tell them why, often they aren't motivated. So I've always said, tell them what and why, but never how.
I really like that as a philosophy. I guess the lesson in that is that it's about having multiple styles in your toolkit to use. It's the right style at the right time with the right people for the right reason. But it's
Yes.
style flexibility that makes the best leaders, the ability to dip into the toolbox for the style that you need at the time. And
Toolbox. Toolbox. That's nice.
yeah, toolkit
It's the
toolbox.
name of
Yeah.
the book.
Yeah. And the point about why is so critical because you're right. People, they work better and they make better decisions when they know why they're doing something, because
Yes.
it then moves it away from being, I just do the task, into I understand that my work is making a difference, that what I do is important and it's adding value in some way. Because that's really what people want to know. They want to know that I'm valuable as a person and that my work is valuable.
Absolutely. You won't grow a leader if you're always repressing that person by saying, do this, and here's how. And maybe I'll tell you why.
Yeah, if
But
I
yeah.
remember. Or I'll tell you
Mhm.
once when you first start in your induction, you'll hear about it. But there's so many other things that happen in induction that you'll forget it in the first day. But that's okay. At least I
Yes.
told you.
At least I
So
told you.
yeah, but I
Hmm.
told you once. How come you didn't remember? That's something I do tell leaders a lot is when you're communicating something important, you need to tell people a lot more than you think you do because
Right.
people have short memories. You can't tell them once when they start in the business and expect them to remember it for 10 years. So you ask, is your leadership style killing innovation before it starts? Can you take us through some of the subtle ways that leaders shut down innovation without realizing it?
Oh, that's easy. And I've seen others do this. Remember, I've invested in 215 entrepreneurs and their teams. And I've been on well more than 40 boards. I stopped counting that 10 years ago. And I've coached, I'd say, tens of additional entrepreneurs, including a couple that I'm coaching right now that are students. And I've watched them as they, over the years, have built businesses. And so what I find from most of these is humility is the first thing, because humility can be mistaken as a weakness. And that's a gigantic problem. And so strong leaders really have nothing to prove, or shouldn't have anything to prove. They should have more questions than they should have answers. They should listen to the people at levels even below their direct reports. They should never try to manage the people below their direct reports, because that cuts off those people at the knees. But listening is not bad. In fact, years ago, in fact, it was 1996, I even remember it that well. I've been on a number of nonprofit boards, some of them big. And on one of them, we had a retreat, and it was a major CEO that said, noses in, fingers out. Think about that one for a minute. So
I
if
like
you
that.
are a chairman of the board, or if you're the CEO, and you want to hear a lot, that's great. But the second that you reach beyond that level below you, that's when you cut these people off at the knees. Noses in, fingers out.
That's really powerful. It's a mistake that you do see even experienced boards making. they just say, for example, you get a board who perhaps have a CEO that maybe isn't performing. And rather than addressing the performance issue with the CEO, they then start working with the executive team and sometimes even layers below that as well. And it disempowers everybody. But what it does is it means that everybody moves down a level in the organisation. So if the board's doing the CEO's job, the CEO starts doing the executive's job, so then start doing their managers' jobs and so on down the line. And I did actually work with a company that had that issue, and the middle level of management in that middle said, we don't have anything to do. We literally have no job because our managers are doing our jobs for us, and the employees obviously do the frontline stuff, but we actually don't have jobs. It was fascinating to see how just that moving to the next layer down, how much that disempowered people to the point where we had a whole layer of management who just didn't have any work to do.
Yeah, and that's the leader's fault.
And
Got to make sure that we underline that.
Yeah.
Because if the leader is attempting to direct people, remember I talked about management by walking around, and that was one of my most favorite things to do. Well, I was visible, and that was good. But if I ever tried to tell somebody to do something without having that person's manager with me at the time, that would have been awful. I knew enough not to do that.
I have seen leaders who empower people in quotes, who say to somebody, feel free to go and make this decision. It's over to you. And then the person makes the decision, and the manager may not actively correct them, but they'll make a comment, the body language and the tone around, well, that's not how I would have done it. And that can be incredibly disempowering too.
Absolutely. It only takes a couple of words to make somebody completely disenchanted, unhappy, sometimes angry. So that's true. A leader has to watch very carefully how they reprimand and how they comment. So, the old statement, you can say something nice about somebody in public, but you better not say something bad about them unless it's in private. That is really true, always has been, and always will. There's another one about that is one you might not have thought of. As chairman of the board, I have sometimes sat in on regular employee meetings where the president was with the next level down, sometimes all employee meetings where there would be the entire company. And the fact that I was sitting in on those meetings, I thought was innocent. I got a telephone call one day from one of those CEOs that said, Dave, we love you, and we know that you are the chairman and you've been here since the founding, but please don't attend these meetings because it kind of disempowers me. It makes the employees look at you to see whether you have any kind of response. That taught me a lesson. I thought I was being good by doing those things when in fact I was interfering.
And that's interesting. And it's something that when I'm working with leaders, particularly around things like emotional intelligence and culture and their impact, I always say to people, your people are watching you a lot more than you think. And I had somebody say to me, I actually don't believe you. And I said, well, in your next team meeting, just pay attention to it. And she came back and she said, you're right. Everyone was looking at me. And so if you've got somebody who's more senior in the room, the people naturally look at that person and they're testing for how does that person react? What do they think of this? And I think that's something leaders underestimate a lot is their invisible impact. It's not what you say necessarily, it's your presence that can have such an impact on people.
Boy, is that right. And what you just said, I had already had maybe 40 years worth of leadership when I did that. And what a lesson to learn after that kind of time. I hadn't realized it either.
Now, you say that most leadership training is a waste of money. What do you think organisations are fundamentally getting wrong? I agree with you, by the way. But what are organisations fundamentally getting wrong here?
I have attended, and I have paid for my employees over time to attend these leadership seminars. And they are great because we come out of those seminars waving the flag, believing what we've just learned. And it is when it finally gets down to the level of teaching and there is any kind of pressure, almost 100% of the time, the people forgot what they learned and they go back to doing what they were doing. Almost 100% of the time. I attended a leadership seminar years ago with my senior team of 5. I had 5 vice presidents. And the one thing I remembered, as long as there were landlines that I could change my message, it was that particular person teaching it that said, change your message every day and say something to everybody about where you are that day, or something that is different than that stale old message that's always on your phone. And I did that for maybe 15 or 20 years. And I can't tell you how many people commented on the fact that I had done that. And they remembered the fact that when they got a message, it wasn't just the average "I'm not here" message. So that was one small thing it carried forward. But I can't remember anything else from that seminar.
It's so interesting. I've observed that a lot is people will walk out of a leadership training incredibly enthusiastic. They're going to implement everything and they take the folder and they sit it pride of place on their desk so they can refer to it when
Right.
they need it. And then after a month or so, it starts to get in the way. So they move it to the bookcase and then eventually it gets to the point where they'll think about it maybe from time to time. They'll think something will come up and they'll think, I remember learning something about that, but I can't find the manual anymore. And it's gone, you know. And there's so much investment in things that just fade by the wayside because they're not put into practice. And that's the key thing, isn't it? Putting it into practice at work. Accountability from your manager who says to you, well, you went to this training. Let's start implementing it. Tell me what you learned. Let's teach other people in the organization. Let's start actually making this happen.
We might get to that in a little while because that's an important part of leadership that you don't necessarily learn from somebody else, but it is very important to get that kind of a feedback loop with your employees. We'll see if you get to it. And if so, I'll be happy to
Yeah.
give you an example.
Yeah. So you say that leadership isn't about knowing what to do. It's about doing it when it's uncomfortable. And that's a hard gap to close. Why do you think that is?
I gave you the story about Bobby, about firing him on the spot. If you step back and you look at the need to be able to make a decision that's unpopular, and that decision can be made when you allocate resources away from one department and toward another. It can be made when you actually do fire somebody for a cause, or whatever else it is that becomes very public very quickly in the way in which I was going to say telephone, but the way in which the culture communicates. People know within minutes when something like that has happened. So people do watch when a crisis hits. And a leadership style that responds, changes, a leader who changes the style based upon the need. A while ago, you asked about types of leadership. You become a decisive leader when there's a fire, when there is something that you need to command. But you don't do that every day because it's going to become very stale. The employees are going to be afraid of you. They're not going to want to step up and become leaders themselves. So, no, it really turns out to be they know intuitively when you've got to act. And if you don't, that determines how well they see you as a leader. So, again, we're back to style, aren't we? And we're back
Yeah.
to discomfort.
Because it is difficult for leaders. I always say to people, it's easy to be a leader when things are going well. It's much, much more difficult when things don't go well. That's when true leadership shines through, doesn't it? You see people who step up and actually become leaders in that moment.
You hit a big one there. Because if you're in a company that is growing extremely fast, your leadership style changes completely, but it seems simple to be able to kind of rise with the boats. But in fact, what you're doing is you're finding ways to find resources to allow that company to continue growth. But it seems easy to the people who are looking at you. Look at the other way. You now have to shed resources, including people, because the company is declining, losing money, running out of money, or the industry is becoming too mature. You didn't realize it. You didn't create a new product in time. And you as a leader are guilty of allowing a company to become too mature and behind the curve. So yes, good leadership doesn't necessarily mean screaming and yelling at people. It is easier when companies are growing, unless they run out of resources at that time. And it is much harder when you have to make tough decisions and people watch you when the company is either declining or very mature and not inventing new things.
Now, circling back to leadership practice and learning and so on. So you've outlined four things that actually do work. So real-time coaching, accountability,
Mm-hmm.
deliberate practice, and consequences. So
Right.
which one of those, or maybe more than one, do you see as most often missing when you work with leaders? And why do you think that is?
Well, first of all those work, period. So I guess that could be the end of my answer. But leadership is a personal experience. Most examples are made by those who spend, say, one time weekly with their direct reports, maybe an hour, maybe a half an hour. And I'll stop and say, if you have more than 6 reports, that's going to be hard to do. I found one of my leaders with 14 direct reports. I wrote about it just last week in one of my blogs because I thought that was excessive. But back to the question, if you have, say, 6 direct reports and you spend an hour a week with them and you give them one thing that you have noticed that you'd like them to focus on, if you remember that and the next week when you meet them, you discuss that one thing and see if they've learned something and what they'd like to talk about, it is a great example of a great leader enhancing the ability of somebody else to think and act on their own because you've spent time with them, one-on-one time with them. I would never do that differently, and yet if I had too many direct reports, I couldn't do it at all.
The most I've ever seen in an organisation was somebody who had nearly 100 direct reports. It was absolutely insane. I said, how do you even do performance reviews? Because they did performance reviews on an annual basis. And he said, I've just got a document with a whole bunch of cut and paste paragraphs. And he said, I just read through the document, find the most relevant paragraph and paste it into the person's review and send it to them. And I said, how often do you actually meet with them? And he said, I don't have time. He said, they come and see me if they've got a crisis and that's all I can manage. It was, yeah, it's always blown my mind thinking back on that there's absolutely no way that somebody could be expected to actually manage that many people effectively. It was, yeah,
Well,
crazy.
he flattened the management curve.
Yeah. Well, that's what they were doing. It was that thing of we need to, be lean and mean. And so they took out a lot
Yes.
of management layers, which often happens. Management layers build up. Sometimes they're overmanaged, but they're there for a reason most of the time. And to sort of remove all of the managers and go, everybody has to have 50, 60 direct reports. I don't know how they thought that was actually going to work in practice.
Let me ask you a question then. How
Sure.
do you promote from within if you don't know enough about the people you're promoting?
Exactly. Yeah, you can't promote, you can't reward people, you can't hold people accountable, you can't even know
Right.
what they're doing on a day basis. And like he said, he managed by crisis. If somebody's got a problem, they come and see me. And so he was fighting fires all day, every day, because with that many people, of course, there's going to be things coming up, particularly if you're not working with them regularly. He was burnt out, he was frustrated. And when I was coaching him, he was, I need to get out of here. I need another job because I can't keep doing this.
What a great management style.
Yeah.
Let's emulate that.
Yeah, but just that, the idea of a cut and paste document where once a year you sort of went through and kind of tried to match people up with a paragraph that made the most sense and then paste that into their document and send it to them. Never even had a conversation, just emailed it to them and said, sign this.
Okay, so if he had 6 direct reports and he had 360 degree at the end of each year or each period, people actually being able to report how well he was doing,
Mm.
that might have been something that gave him a hint that he was doing something wrong. But with a
Yeah,
thousand people or however many there were,
yeah,
there's no way of doing a 360. And so
no.
he'll never learn.
Yeah, and I mean, that was something that was imposed on him by above. They just made the decision to cut out the whole, heaps of managers. And I don't know if they had a people and culture department that was involved in it. I suspect probably not. I don't think the people and culture department would have advised people to do that, but it was just setting everybody up to fail, not just the people who were left as managers, but everybody in the organisation was set up to fail.
I can see that. So then you have to ask for the chairman of the board. Chairman
Yeah.
of the board is supposed to supply the resources.
Mm.
That's the job, meaning sometimes raising cash, sometimes asking the critical question about where is the bottleneck and what can we do as a board to help you remove those bottlenecks. And if there is a weak chairman of the board and a weak board, that person can just continue doing just what you said,
Mm.
and to the detriment of the entire corporation.
You do see that. So you gave an example of the CEO asking 2 weekly questions, and that's a very powerful framework. So why do you think those sort of simple leadership disciplines are actually outperforming more complex frameworks? I had this discussion yesterday with somebody who mentioned he's spent a lot of time actually distilling leadership into sort of almost bite-sized frameworks for that reason. He said that leadership frameworks are often very complex. So is it the fact that they're memorable? Is it the fact that they're easy? What do you think's the real success factor behind that sort of very simple model?
First thing is, remember I talked a moment ago about this 1 hour meeting with your direct reports and give them just one thing? If you say, I've got 5 things for you to talk about, that person will remember one of them, maybe remember all 5 and then not perform well on them all. So there's the first thing, just repeating what I said a moment ago. But how about spending time helping and not lecturing? A big difference in style. Or not proving that you're the best mind around, which is a problem. In those hourly meetings, if it were a lecture, if it were saying, this is what I think you should be doing, without even asking how well that person behaved, what they learned from last week, what they need that they haven't got to do their job, you are not a good leader. You're just a lecturer and you're proving that you're the best.
Now, when you talk about leading people, you emphasize addressing conflict, addressing underperformance, addressing misalignment immediately. Why, in your experience with coaching people, why do you think so many leaders find that difficult and tend to avoid it?
Once more, I am a leader, so I must be the best in town and I must know what I'm talking about. It's a question of real vulnerability, and leaders should learn that. And in fact, if they don't have a coach, they may never learn that because people won't want to confront a leader, even if they know the leader has gotten a little overboard. And so, again, I've been chairman several times, taking a leader aside, never in public, and saying, your style is a little bit too autocratic. And I'm finding just by watching in these meetings that you really aren't listening. You're talking. And if you think that you know everything, that's great. And I'd like to talk to you about that and maybe learn from you. But what don't you know? What you don't know. And so that sometimes humbles the leader to an extent that does open them to further conversation. And sometimes it doesn't. And then you have the tough conversation at the board level about whether the leader is really behaving in the right way that, first of all, helps people to grow within the corporation. Second of all, to enjoy what they're doing, the culture of the company. And third, to do their best work.
We do find leaders who struggle to make, probably not make the tough decisions, but they struggle to have the tough conversations with people. And that
Mm-hmm.
is often about fear of disrupting the relationship, fear of what the person's going to think. And it's something that is not as common as when people get to the very top of organisations, but certainly that's early to middle career leaders find that very difficult. What advice would you give them?
This is another one where I think that leader, if that leader had no coach and had to try and do this all alone, that leader will never learn. So what kind of advice? Get a coach. And the coach has to be somebody that isn't someone you report to necessarily, because then you're not going to reveal all the things that you feel. And in my opinion, as chairman of the board, sometimes a leader is afraid because the chairman can replace, at least lead the board to replace the CEO. And that is a truism, especially when you're taking venture capital. However, if you have a coach, and we usually call that a CEO coach from within the board or outside of the board, often the CEO will share things that he or she would never have shared with the board or definitely not with direct reports. It's why we have these CEO roundtables. These are fellow chairmen and CEOs who really can say anything they want, knowing the roundtable will help them without having anything get back to their corporation or their competitors.
It's a very good model that it probably still exists. I was involved with it called the CEO Circle in Melbourne, and exactly that model, that
Mm-hmm.
opportunity for CEOs to get together with people from different industries, so they weren't in the room with any of their competition, and talk about the real things. And it was really valuable. It was one of those things where I think CEOs, I think they need that space because it being very lonely at the top is true, that they often don't have people that they can genuinely talk to, genuinely confess their vulnerabilities. And it was really interesting during COVID because I remember the very early conversations when COVID hit were how are we going to make sure people are working when they're at home and we can't see them? And it moved very quickly into our people are overworking, burning themselves out. How do we actually slow them down? which I thought was interesting. The fact that we moved from this needing to see people and have them in the office to make sure that they're actually doing work into how do we actually make sure that people take proper breaks and are rested and look after themselves. So it was, yeah.
Actually, it's for the larger corporations, there's a law in the state that I'm in, California, that there have to be 2 10-minute breaks a day. The lunch period has to be 30 minutes. And who's going to enforce that is a good question. I think the employees begin to learn very quickly. And then you'll have those that take a 2-hour break because nobody's watching them. So there is a need for HR or somebody to be able to supervise this. I wrote a book in 2016, I believe, with a co-author. We called it Get Scrappy. And she had 20 employees, as I remember. And it was before COVID that she sent them all home, closed the office, and was entirely remote. And so she, who had been a cruise director for a cruise line, entertainment director, really knew how to keep the employees together by gamifying the entire experience, putting them together in groups of 5, having them on chat all day long so that they could talk to each other on chat, having little contests, having things that were able to be quickly resolved. I learned a lot from her, and that book was kind of the result. And sure, there are times when remote work is going to be very effective if well managed, and the problem is there are corporations as big as Amazon that don't believe this, that have called people back to work a couple of years after COVID, and are losing employees who have learned that they can move way away to remote locations you would have never guessed, to other countries, and behave just as well and be perhaps even more productive because they aren't interrupted.
We've certainly seen that in Australia, and the driver behind that has been the vacancy rates in inner city offices.
Oh, yes.
And the government's been very concerned with the death of small business, because when you've got lots of office workers in the CBD, they obviously go out at lunchtime and buy food and they get coffee and they do some shopping and they go to the post office. And when the CBD was dead during COVID, and so there's been a real push, certainly in the last couple of years, to bring particularly government workers back into office spaces. Most states have reached an agreement where people need to be in the office maybe 3 to 4 days a week, but the other couple of days they can work at home, which seems to be a reasonable balance. Most employees seem to be fairly happy with that, but some aren't. I've had coaching clients who've quit their jobs in government because they were told they had to be back in the office. So I think that's going to be the balancing act for certainly the foreseeable future, is that how do we actually find that sweet spot where we've got enough people coming into the office regularly enough to have those sort of connections and build the culture, but then also give people the flexibility that they need as well.
And I want to recognize that young employees want to be seen. And so when they're remote, it's very unlikely that those people will call the favor of their direct managers, and much more unlikely that they will be the ones that are advanced. So there is this balance, and you just named it, between all remote and all in the office. But, when you're remote, sometimes I, as a manager, and have observed from others who are, you'll see emails at 2:30 in the morning. And so if you try and fit somebody into 9 to 5, and that somebody happens to love to work in the evening, let them go shop and do the laundry during the day. You'll end up seeing the same hours of productivity, maybe even more hours of productivity of the hours they work, again, because they're not going to be interrupted.
Now, you talk about the buggy whip trap, which is leaders clinging to outdated models. Where do you see that playing out today?
If you look at the curve for any product, and maybe even a service as well, but usually for a product, well, now with AI, I'll say service as well, come to think of it, there is a life cycle. And the life cycle usually is early adopters, and early adopters lead with their positive reinforcement and compliments toward people being able to take a chance that aren't necessarily early adopters, which leads to a product building toward maturity. And that's as the company grows fast and everybody's happy. And then there is that point that I discussed at the very beginning of this conversation. When a company is mature, but the leadership doesn't understand, realize, or plan for it, then there was this problem with a company starting to die. Let me give you my own story. I managed this hotel computer company, which for 1 second, maybe 5 years, was the largest such company in the world. I told you how many offices we had. I would travel around the world twice a year, meeting customers, signing, documents as the senior leader might, and seeing my office employees. And that was great. But I didn't realize we were mini computer based. I didn't realize when the first IBM PCAT came out that we were going to be challenged to a degree that we would be the buggy whip. And in fact, a German company came out of nowhere having programmed for the new IBM PC, and it took them maybe 5 years to displace us. Boy, were we the buggy whip, say that 10 times. And I learned my lesson big time. Even though I tried very quickly to convert to using a database system under Oracle, it was too late. There's another lesson there, if I can extend that. The buggy whip trap is also sometimes coupled with the fact that your margins are going to be challenged by some new product, especially if you were making high margins with the old. So we were, with those hotel systems, selling $100,000 computer systems that we would make 25%. So there's a $25,000 margin just on the hardware. Our software was another $25,000, and then we'd have installation fees on top of that. So then the IBM PC came out, and these owners of the hotels would say, well, for $3,000, I only need 5 workstations. That's $15,000. How do I need to pay you $100,000? And in fact, they needed to pay a little bit more, but just use that as the example. And so I took my management team and I said, and I don't know where I got this, where there's mystery, there's margin. Let's figure out where the mystery is so that we can charge for this money we're losing for not having sold the hardware. And my 5 managers and I got together, and this is where it takes real empowerment for them to really think of it without having to worry about whether they're saying something that seems illogical. And we were able to find, first of all, that these new systems were so new, no one knew how to network them. That was worth some money. No one knew how to install our software, of course. I mean, by definition. Nobody could configure our software, by definition. We were giving those things free before. So we got back about 15% of the margin, of that 25% margin, that we will have just walked away from. Where there's mystery, there is margin. And that statement has just reverberated around business after I said that and published it in a book and talked about it in keynotes. And now I keep hearing it as recently as just last month from the pharmacy industry. I've been hearing it from the banking industry for years. And they give me attribution, so it's not a question of having stolen the statement or idea. But think of the pharmacy industry. With these giant pharmacy chains, how does the local neighborhood pharmacy survive? They have to find more margin for what little they can do. And so that statement becomes true of a lot of businesses that are now being disempowered for others, for other reasons. I was off the subject slightly, but they both related.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I really like that idea. It's just sparked something for me to think about. Now, you highlight that many CEOs chase revenue, but the smartest ones obsess over time. What do you mean by that?
Oh boy. One of my favorite subjects. In fact, I years ago in the computer industry named the problem time management. Now, that's a pretty good set of generic words, but it really is important. And I'm speaking here about the time, not of the individual that they would think of as controlling their time well, but the core competency of the corporation. Let's say that you're a development corporation in the software industry, which is where I came from, and you take 18 months to get your product to market. But you had fixed overhead all during that 18 months. And you have, let's pick some numbers, 25 employees, you're a rather small company, you have an office, you have the payroll, you have all of the overhead that comes from everything you spend, payroll usually being the largest, but rent being another, and many other costs too, they continue. Now let's say that your competitor is able to get its product to market in 6 months. Today, that's very possible, by the way, with AI, but let's just say 6 versus 18. There's a whole year worth of fixed overhead burned. And you have two things you've lost. Number one is the money we just talked about, but the other is the other competitor had 12 months worth of early adopters they could get to long before you did. And now you're playing catch up from day number one. So time, to me, is as important, just as important as cash, because time is cash. So time bankruptcy is when you misspend those corporate core resources.
Yeah, and certainly today we're seeing, I saw it quoted a couple of days ago that with AI now, that even a teenager could launch a software as a service company over a weekend with the help of AI. I don't know how true that is, but I suppose it's escalating the pace of change, isn't it, exponentially?
Um, there is, now we are speaking of something that may be different a month from now, but Claude has just released Claude Code. And so we call it vibe coding. People who have never coded before can define in their prompt exactly what they want. Let the vibe code work for you. It will actually test the code and then deliver it to you. You could design a website. You can create an app. You can create a process. You can spin up a process, even though you've never coded before. Now think of what others have had to do in the past.
Yeah.
I mean, I had 26 programmers.
Yeah.
So sure.
It's exciting and scary at the same time, isn't it? Sort of think how fast things are changing and how we're getting completely off topic here, but how AI is going to replace some roles and enhance others. And I guess one of the key things for leaders to be thinking about is how does this actually change your business? Because what we're seeing and hearing is employees fear losing their jobs. And it's been in the news over here that Amazon got rid of, I forget, 4,000 people or 6,000 people recently, replaced them with AI. So there's a real fear for employees about losing their jobs. And I would hate to see AI being used as a tool to create efficiency by getting rid of people, rather than how can it actually help build and enhance our company so we keep the people but increase the profit, for example. So it's going to be
So
an
if we
interesting
go
world.
back to the Industrial Revolution,
Yep.
we worry about the Luddites having said the
Yeah.
same thing. And I
Yeah.
can tell you at every one of those revolutions that we've had, the computer revolution,
Mm.
when Henry Ford started the first assembly line, people always thought they were going to lose jobs. And what happens is you have to take a leap of faith, and there will be a short-term loss as people are retrained, as colleges and universities begin to understand that the old way is not the way they have to train and teach. More jobs are created because of the ability to have more efficient economies and more efficient use of money and funds. So take that leap, please.
I hope to
My
see companies
keynotes,
do it. Mm.
my keynotes for a while, for about 5 or 6 years, were "Will tech take your job?" Very popular keynote, and it was
Yeah.
about AI. And now it's so pervasive, I don't use that keynote anymore because everybody speaks of it and thinks of it. But there was a time when I would give that in front of computer managers, finance managers, and I would tell them that their jobs are at risk. And that's not something you want to tell someone you're giving a keynote to. But
True.
it woke them up and perhaps made them think.
Yes, I remember I coordinated and created a summit called The Future of Work, and this was going back to, I don't know, maybe 2019, and then somebody did keynote on that, and he mentioned a website you could actually go to. I think it was called something like willrobotstakemyjob.com, where you could actually
Okay.
go and check.
Well, I can't claim that I wrote that, but I'm glad to hear somebody else that had the same
Yeah.
idea.
All right, so let's just wrap up. So if you've got a leader listening today and they could change just one behavior that would have the biggest impact, what would your recommendation be?
I would think that people aren't just tools of production or growth. They want reinforcement, they want encouragement, they want truthfulness, they want innovation, they want an ear to listen, They wanted personal acknowledgement. So a great leader provides all of this, even with a big company that seems like that's the hardest thing to do. So I'd like to just leave people who are watching and listening to what we're talking about today with a leader should empower, remove obstacles, and get out of the way.
Thank you. That's really wise words. Thank you so much for joining me. For those people who are watching on whatever platform you're on, you'll find a link to buy the Leaders Toolkit in the comments section below the video and encourage you to get it. It really is a great read. I enjoyed it because the ideas were quite compact. So you could dip into it and
Yes.
kind of look at a particular chapter and read it, and it was quite easy to understand and easy to follow. It wasn't really sort of heavy on theory. It was very example driven. So I really enjoyed the book. So thank you very much for sharing that with me. And thanks, Dave, once again for joining me.
Roz, it was fun. Thank you.
My pleasure.